Europe's sense of security may have been upended by intercontinental rhetoric this week, but in Kyiv, the threat remains deadlier, more immediate. This morning, another morning at war. Monday will mark 3 years of this. For Ukraine's president, buffeted by overlapping blows from Washington and Moscow, a simple question: how are you?
Як у вас настрій?
Завжди бойовий. Завжди.
Always fighting, always, came the reply. Here to meet him, Donald Trump's Ukraine envoy, Keith Kellogg, battling public doubts about the extent of his role in negotiations. A day after Donald Trump called President Zelenskyy a dictator who was avoiding peace to keep the US gravy train going. Perhaps instructive that the US cancelled a news conference that was supposed to follow.
На завтра запланована наша зустріч.
In his nightly address last night, Zelenskyy was careful not to repeat the accusation that had so infuriated Trump that he was operating in a Russian disinformation space, instead appealing to American pragmatism. It didn't work. A short while later, Trump repeating the attack he'd made on social media, complete with his own disinformation about the extent of US aid and Zelenskyy's democratic credentials.
But think of it, a modestly successful comedian. President Zelenskyy talked the United States of America into spending $350 billion to go into a war that basically couldn't be won. A dictator without elections. Zelenskyy better move fast or he's not going to have a country left. Got to move fast.
A sign of the spinning world order, the Kremlin spokesman coming to the US president's defense, calling Zelenskyy's remarks unacceptable. But Zelenskyy isn't the only one saying Trump is adopting Russian talking points. Here's the man the Biden State Department called Russia's most energetic propagandist.
Most of the cities are laying on their sides.
Delighting, almost disbelievingly, in what he took to be the result of President Putin's phone call to Donald Trump.
Но фразы, которые он дает, но они настолько глубокие, настолько правильные, что они абсолютно совпадают с нашим видением. Я знаю, что Зеленский нас смотрит каждое утро. Наслаждайся. Погода.
For Europe's leaders, the outlook remains bracing. The German Chancellor, 3 days out from an election he's expected to lose,
Der ukrainische Präsident ist ein demokratisch gewählter.
pointedly referring to Zelenskyy as democratically elected, while the head of NATO talked more delicately about extraordinary engagement from the US and the need for Ukraine to have robust security guarantees.
And NATO allies are actively discussing what that might entail. While there is much that still needs to be decided, there's no question that Europe has a vital role to play in securing peace in Ukraine.
An end to the fighting is what so many Ukrainians want, but evidence in Kyiv today of an unwillingness to be dictated to en route.
Zelenskyy is definitely not a dictator. He's always stood for our country. I voted for him. I hope that Trump takes it back.
And this from a man who didn't vote for Zelenskyy, says he's not his president.
Trump says a lot of stupid things. Of course we need elections, but it's impossible to hold them because the war is ongoing.
One person was killed and 3 injured in an attack on southern Kherson this morning. The regional governor blamed guided Russian bombs. Ukraine's civilians have long asked when all this will stop. Now they also ask on whose terms.
And we are waiting for the man who expects to be the next German Chancellor, Friedrich Merz, to appear on the stage just behind me, probably in the next half an hour or so. Now, by lambasting Volodymyr Zelenskyy and lauding Vladimir Putin, Donald Trump has splintered the European alliance with his pivot towards Moscow. But pivoting the other way has been Finland, which has grown closer to the West since the Ukraine war started. Earlier, I spoke to the former Finnish president, Sauli Niinisto, who earned himself the nickname the Putin Whisperer for his close relationship with his Russian counterpart, even on the ice hockey rink. Their working relationship continued through Russia's annexation of Crimea, but ended after the invasion of Ukraine, when President Niinisto called the Kremlin to notify Russia that Finland intended to join NATO. Well, last year he left his post after 12 years at the helm, and I began by asking him about his impressions of the Russian president.
Well, he was quite logical. I mean, you could well see that he is frustrated from the destiny of Russia, Soviet Union, Russia in the 90s. And I think this frustration got deeper and deeper.
And how worried are you about the pronouncements that we've heard from President Trump in Washington, especially last night when he said that President Zelenskyy of Ukraine is a dictator?
It seems that he hasn't, President Trump, any specific plan to work with in Ukraine. I know quite well President Trump. I have met him several times during his first period. He gives an aggressive answer to anybody criticizing him. And he has undoubtedly read that President Zelenskyy was criticizing him. And I consider that the answer was because of that.
And to be more prepared, does that involve, for instance, NATO troops, including Finnish troops, on the ground in Ukraine?
Someday, hopefully, during this year, there will be some kind of peace agreement. Ukraine needs guarantees for that peace. And there we need USA, we need Europeans to guarantee that. But on the other hand, I have also said that it would be good if China would be involved in this process, guaranteeing in a way the Russian side, keeping Russia in the agreement, so stopping them to go further.
Do you think that President Trump is doing what he's doing at the moment, being very nice to the Russians, courting Vladimir Putin, because ultimately what he's really interested in is trying to separate Russia from China, because America sees China ultimately as its real adversary?
China has a very keen touch, maybe thumb, over Russia. And Russians have to make notice to that too.
What about the Baltic republics? They are very nervous about any Russian expansion. And of course, if the Baltic republics were to be subsumed by Russia, if they were to be invaded the way that Ukraine was, then you would find yourself on the front line. Very much so, wouldn't you?
Then we would have a situation where all the NATO countries are in front line. The question is then that it doesn't end to Baltic. It will be, Third World War or something comparable. I don't see that that will happen. But if Russia would do something in Baltics, that would be the result.
Do you think the world has been in such a dangerous place since 1945 as it is now?
Well, we were living in Cold War for decades. I would describe this situation as a warm war, if compared to Cold War. So this is more dangerous.
President Niinistö, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so very much. Thank you.
Well, the Donald Trump faithful have been gathering near Washington, D.C. for their annual pilgrimage to all things conservative. Our international editor, Lindsay Hilsum, has been to the Conservative Political Action Conference, or CPAC, to find out how they all feel about Trump 2.0 1 month in. Lindsay, how was it?
Matt, it's just fascinating because you feel like the world is upside down. All that stuff about how dangerous the world is now, which we're hearing from Europe, it's exactly the opposite. Here at CPAC, what they're saying is everything's right with the world now because we've got a true leader for the world, President Donald Trump. Now, it's 30 days since he took office, 73 executive orders, or should we say royal decrees, because the White House put out a picture of Donald Trump with a crown on his head last night and a sign saying, "Long live the King." Now, where I was today, the people I was chatting to, it was really interesting because a lot of the lines that he and J.D. Vance and Elon Musk have been coming out with, they were just repeated back to me about Ukraine, about Russia, about the Rotherham grooming gangs. If you asked a little more, they couldn't go much further. because what this is all about was they love Donald Trump, they love everybody around him, and they love everything that they do.
What's up, guys? How we doing?
Onto the stage, to the enthusiasm, if not exactly adulation, of the crowd. VP JD, the number 2, the warm-up act before the main event.
Elon Musk will be here on the CPAC stage.
The man of the moment, on his crusade to save the American taxpayers' money. At least the Vice President had a better reception than last time he addressed an audience.
Shifting to your incredible speech at the Munich conference. Did you all watch that?
Not everybody liked
it.
You guys liked it.
Okay.
Not everybody liked it.
This is a gathering of true believers who, unlike foolish Europeans, understand that migrants should be out and far-right governments in.
I'm not even blaming the Europeans. I'm actually saying you follow the lead of Joe Biden into censorship and mass migration. Follow the lead of Donald J. Trump, and that's free speech, borders, and sovereignty. That is the future for our shared civilization.
He's quite critical of Europe. I'm European. What do you think of that?
I think he wants the best for you, and he just really wants to make sure that
Again, unity.
Yeah,
right?
again, that we are all on the same side.
We're fixing the U.S., obviously. We just started it. We're going 100 miles an hour. We're not stopping. And I think the other countries are catching on.
I don't think that any of it's going to get better unless we really lead.
But has President Trump gone too far? Last night, the White House put out a picture of him as King Donald.
He put it on a tweet. So he put on a tweet, I'm a king. That's fine, you know. Elvis Presley said he was the king, you know. I mean,
it doesn't make him a king.
But he is the leader of the free world.
Yeah, exactly.
And if for once we have a leader that's standing up right now and fighting for America first, but every country's citizens first.
A few international acolytes were there, one using what might be described as the royal we.
We want a Trump revolution in Britain. We want to flood the zone. We want Elon and his nerd army of muskrats examining the British deep state.
But at CPAC, what people really care about is domestic issues. Stopping immigrants crossing the southern border, reducing the size of the government, telling men to be men and women to be women. First they won the election. Now they think they've won the argument, and it's time the rest of the world fell in behind.
Well, we now know a bit more about Sir Keir Starmer's meeting in the US with Donald Trump next week. Our chief correspondent Alex Thompson is in Westminster for us now. Alex.
Yes, confirmation from the White House late this afternoon that Sir Keir Starmer will visit Donald Trump in Washington next Thursday, so a week today. But this side of the Atlantic, consider this. This was the day on which a British Defence Secretary was asked in all seriousness by a journalist, do you trust the President of the United States? That's where we now are. Well, the context was trust Donald Trump to deliver a lasting peace in Ukraine. That was the question. John Healey didn't exactly answer it in full, but he did say this. He said, from the British perspective, any such settlement in the war must be with a strong and united, note that word, united NATO, not perhaps top of the Trump wish list. We've got some pictures now of John Healey today with his Norwegian counterpart on political manoeuvres in the Norway snows. Pictures which might raise the spirits of Donald Trump. After all, of course, he wants Europe to step up to the plate when it comes to defending itself as he sees it. Less pleasing indeed, though, what Mr. Healey said when asked inevitably the question, what do you make of Donald Trump calling the Ukrainian president, quote, a dictator? This is what he said.
He was elected. He's the elected leader of Ukraine, and he's done what Winston Churchill did in Britain in the Second World War, suspended elections while at war. And our job is to stand with the Ukrainians, support the Ukrainians, support them in their fight, and if they choose to talk, support them in the negotiations as well. And I'm a defence minister, and I don't want to see us jeopardising the peace by forgetting the war.
Very clear blue water there, obviously, between the UK government and the US administration. And of course, John Healey very much in line with his own boss, the PM, but not the only party leader in agreement. A certain Nigel Farage was at that conference that Lindsay Hilson was reporting on a few moments ago in Maryland in the US. He too asked the question, of course, what did you make of the dictator comment? He said it was wrong. But he also cautioned people not to take everything that Donald Trump says too literally. Well, I guess you could say that Trump 2 administration has already achieved one thing at least, and that is uniting all political leaders in the UK against, in condemnation or at least heavy criticism of his description of Volodymyr Zelenskyy as a dictator. Back to you.
Alex, thanks very much.